Welcome, everyone. Another nice big crowd tonight. I call the May 15th City Council meeting to order, and as a reminder, we continue to have a remote aspect to our meetings. Both staff and members of the public may be participating in tonight's meeting remotely via WebEx. The first item on the agenda this evening is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I invite you to join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. One of the reasons we have a big crowd is because May tends to be Proclamation Month. So we have a lot of proclamations to do before we start our regular business this evening. The first one is ID 1364, and I would like to invite Councilmember Martz to the podium. This is the Police Week proclamation, and thank you to all of those who are very easy to recognize in the audience who came to receive this proclamation. We appreciate all that you do. Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to invite Chief Schwan and the other members of the IPD who are with her this evening to join us at the podium.
It's a big group.
All righty. Whereas in 1962, President Kennedy proclaimed May 15th as National Peace Officers Memorial Day, and the calendar week in which May 15th falls as National Police Week, and whereas the members of the law enforcement agency of the City of Issaquah play an important role in safeguarding the rights and freedoms of our community members, and whereas it is important to know and understand the problems, duties, and responsibilities of our police department, and whereas our police department serves the people in safeguarding life and property, protecting them against violence or disorder, and protecting the innocent against deception and the weak against oppression or intimidation. And whereas our police department has grown to be a modern and scientific law enforcement agency, which unceasingly provides a vital public service. Therefore, the City of Issaquah does hereby proclaim the week of May 14th to the 20th to be Police Week in the City of Issaquah, and we invite the community to join us in thanking the Issaquah Police Department for their service and outstanding contributions. The City therefore did herefore set their hand and seal of the City of Issaquah this 15th day of May, 2023. Chief? And if you'd like to make a comment?
Thank you. Thank you, council members, Madam Mayor. I'd like to introduce, we have Officers Wynn, Burtis, Michaels, DeVille, Lane, and Gutierrez with us this evening. They're all working, and this proclamation we all appreciate very much. There are people that are made to run away from things, and there are some that are run towards it, and thankfully we have many personnel, these fine gentlemen and the other men and women that are in our department do an amazing job and are here for the community on a daily basis. And so we thank them, and I thank you all for the proclamation and for recognizing the great work that they do year-round. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commander Schwan and team. Thank you, Councilmember Martz. The next proclamation this evening is ID 1365, and I would like to invite Councilmember Hunt to go to the podium. This is the Emergency Medical Services Week proclamation.
And I would like to invite up to the podium Chief Lane and Deputy Chief Aho, as well as the other members of Eastside Fire and Rescue. Thank you. whereas in 1974, President Gerald Ford announced and authorized the first National Emergency Medical Services Week, and whereas medical services are a vital public service, and whereas the members of Eastside Fire and Rescue stand ready to provide life-saving care to those in need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and whereas access to quality emergency care dramatically improves the survival and recovery rate of those who experience sudden illness or injury, and whereas emergency medical services have grown to fill a gap by providing important out-of-hospital care, including preventative medicine, follow-up care, and access to telemedicine, and whereas the members of Eastside Fire and Rescue, whether career or reserves, engage in thousands of hours of specialized training and continuing education to enhance their life-saving skills. Whereas it is appropriate to recognize the value and the accomplishments of emergency medical services providers by designating Emergency Medical Services Week. Now, therefore, Mary Lou Pauley, Mayor of the City of Issaquah, does hereby proclaim the week of May 21st to 27th to be Emergency Medical Services Week in the City of Issaquah, and I invite the community to join me in thanking the Eastside Fire and Rescue for their service and outstanding contributions. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council, and members of the community. Ben Lane, the Fire Chief of the Eastside Fire and Rescue. I do have with me the two distinguished gentlemen here who are riding the aid car. The ladder truck got a call, so they weren't available to join us. So we have Firefighter Good and Firefighter Wilson. I do have our Ops Chief, Chief Aho, with me as well. Although we are a fire department, nearly 70% of what we do is EMS calls. We're able to do that by the great support by the community members and the council. So again, thank you. And year to date, we've been able to provide exceptional service to over 1,300 calls for EMS service here in the city of Issaquah. So it's an honor and privilege to accept this on behalf of the fine men and women of Eastside Fire and Rescue, and thank you. Small people up front.
Good luck.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Councilmember Hunt. And remind me again, you said a type of call, but you didn't actually spell it out. Yes, emergency med. Okay, for those who are not acronym rich with the city, it's Emergency Medical Services. Thank you, Chief. The next proclamation this evening is ID 1366, Public Works Week proclamation, and I see Deputy Council President Hall is already at the podium. Come on up,
Yes.
Director Moon.
Thank you, Mayor. I have the honor of recognizing our incredible Public Works staff, and I'm joined by our Public Works Director, Emily Moon. So, whereas this year marks the 63rd Annual National Public Works Week, and whereas the 2023 national theme, Connecting the World Through Public Works, honors the Public Works professionals, and Public Works is the thread that connects us all, no matter where we live in the world. And whereas our Public Works professionals focus on infrastructure, facilities, services that are of vital importance to sustainable and resilient communities and to the public health, high quality of life, and well-being of the people of Issaquah. And whereas these infrastructure, facilities, and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of Public Works professionals, engineers, managers, and employees at all levels of government and in the private sector, who are responsible for rebuilding, improving, and protecting our transportation, water supply, water treatment and solid waste systems, public buildings, and other structures and facilities essential for our community. And whereas we pay tribute to the substantial contributions these individuals make to protecting our health, safety, and quality of life, now therefore, Mary Lou Pauley, the Mayor of Issaquah, does proclaim that May 21st through the 22nd be Public Works Week in the city of Issaquah, and invites the community to join us in thanking the Public Works Department for their service and outstanding contributions. Thank you.
Thank you for this recognition on behalf of the 70 employees in Public Works who do amazing work every day to take care of our infrastructure, steward all of our assets, be excellent stewards of the environment. I'm just happy to be here to say thank you. on their behalf for this recognition, and we'll keep up the good work.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Hall and Director Moon. I'm going to be doing the next two proclamations, and the first one is ID 1377, Safe Boating and Paddling Week Proclamation, and I'd like to invite Ephraim Chrysler from the Coast Guard to come up and join. And first off, everybody, let's thank Ephraim for his services in the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. Whereas the National Safe Boating Week is coordinated each year by the National Safety Boating Council and its boating safety partners across the U.S. and Canada, and for nearly 100 million Americans, boating continues to be a popular recreational activity. And from coast to coast and everywhere in between, people are taking to the water and enjoying time together, boating, sailing, paddling, and fishing. Whereas on average, 650 people die each year in boating-related accidents in the United States, with the vast majority of those accidents caused by human error and poor judgment. And whereas this campaign serves to remind us to keep safety front and center all season long, and whereas a significant number of boaters who lose their lives by drowning each year would be alive today if they had worn their life jackets. And whereas the city of Issaquah is adjacent to Lake Sammamish and encompasses numerous other waterways, now therefore I, Mary Lou Pauley, Mayor of the city of Issaquah, do hereby proclaim the week of May 30th, 2026 to be Safe Boating and Paddling Week. And I'm going to invite Ephraim to say a few words.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. My name is Ephraim Krischer. I'm a member of the Coast Guard Auxiliary. The Auxiliary is the civilian volunteer component of the Coast Guard, and we are primarily involved with promoting recreational boating safety. We are concerned about the number of accidents and deaths, as the mayor mentioned, including involving recreational boating in our area, and we try to mitigate the risk by providing boating education classes, courtesy vessel safety checks, and outreach to boaters and the general public. Our key message to the public are a few simple things that people can do to stay safe around the water. Most important is to wear a life jacket, and it's very simple. I could put it on. Avoid boating under the influence of alcohol and other substances that can affect judgment, and of course, being prepared by checking weather, having the right equipment, and going with a partner or group. We would welcome the opportunity to partner with the City of Issaquah in any efforts to enhance the safety of those enjoying the local waters this year. Thank you again for joining with us to make a statement about the importance of boating safety again this year. And I want to add that I'm particularly pleased that with the City of Issaquah, since my daughter, my son-in-law, and my 3 young grandsons live in Issaquah and are out on the water. So I am delighted that the city is concerned about boating safety. Thank you.
Ephraim, can we take a picture together?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, let's get it. I want them to see your full-on life jacket. I love it.
Thank you.
The last item under proclamations this evening is ID 1421, Gun Violence Awareness Day Proclamation. And I would like to invite Bridget, Julie, Virgil, Alex, Kelly, and anybody else who came to join them, because I heard there were some names I might have missed. Thank you all for coming tonight. Whereas every day, more than 120 Americans are killed by gun violence and more than 200 are shot and wounded, with an average of more than 17,000 gun homicides every year. And whereas Americans are 26 times more likely to be killed with guns than people in other high-income communities. And whereas protecting public safety is the mayor's highest responsibility, and whereas gun violence prevention is more important than ever as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to exacerbate gun violence, after significantly increased gun sales, increased calls to suicide and domestic violence hotlines, and an increase in gun violence across our country, And whereas in January 2013, Hadia Pendleton was tragically shot and killed at age 15. And to recognize her birthday in June, people across the United States have annually recognized the first Friday of June as National Gun Violence Awareness Day by wearing orange in tribute to Hadia Pendleton and other victims of gun violence and the loved ones of those victims. Whereas we renew our commitment to reduce gun violence and pledge to do all we can to keep firearms out of the wrong hands and encourage responsible gun ownership to help keep our community safe. Now, therefore, I, Mary Lou Pauley, Mayor of the City of Issaquah, do hereby proclaim June 3rd, 2023 to be Gun Violence Awareness Day in Issaquah.
Thank you, Mayor Polly, Council. I'm Bridget Shepard. I'm one of over 250 volunteers here in the Issaquah-Sammamish Snoqualmie area. Thank you, sorry. Who have joined together with Moms Demand Action and 10 million others nationally to lend our voices to this cause. One important fact that I want to share is that it's a solvable problem, and that the 5 states that have the strongest gun laws have cut gun deaths by 70%. That's not something you hear in the headlines, but that's what we need to, the story we need to tell. So I would like to invite anyone who wants to join us. We accept moms, dads, uncles, aunts, kids into our movement to text ENOUGH to 64433. We are planning many actions locally that will help promote safe gun storage to reduce suicides and unintended gun violence, as well as other actions to educate the public and make sure that we're doing our best to make Issaquah and our surrounding area gun violence free. So thank you so much.
If it's okay, can I take a picture with you all?
I'll come in the middle.
Okay, I'll go in the middle. Yeah. I just want to read your signs and your shirts. They look amazing. And thank you for all you're doing. All of you.
Thank you, Ms. Polly.
Thank you to everyone who took the time to come tonight for the proclamations. The next item of special business this evening on our agenda is ID 1421, the 2023 legislation session highlights, with a new highlight today. And I'd like to invite City Lobbyist Shelley Helder to make the presentation. Welcome, Shelley. Up there is great.
Good evening. Good to be with you. I am Shelley Helder, and I have the privilege of serving as the city's state contract lobbyist, representing your interests in Olympia. Before I get started, I want to just note that there is a comprehensive written report for you in your council packet. It has detailed budget summaries, descriptions of the bills that passed that have a nexus with items in the city's policy manual. So it's much more comprehensive than what I'll be able to cover this evening, so please use that as a reference document. This evening, I'm going to provide an overview of the 2023 legislative session, and I'll review the outcome of the city's legislative priorities, share some highlights about additional legislative issues, and then we'll wrap up talking about next steps. So the 2023 legislative session was the first time the legislature has conducted their work in person in 2 years. The public was still able to participate virtually through remote testimony at public hearings, but every legislator was in Olympia. It was the first year of the biennium. It was a long 105 days, and the primary objective in a long session is to adopt the biennial budgets, which the legislature did. In addition to adopting the budgets, the legislature considered over 2,200 bills and ultimately passed 482. Because this was the first year of the biennium, any bill that did not pass this year is automatically reintroduced and is up for consideration next year. Democrats continued to hold strong majorities in both chambers, and they set the agenda in terms of what policies were considered. Following the last election cycle, there were over 20 new legislators elected, and that resulted in shifting of committee assignments, new committee chairs, new people in positions of caucus leadership, and all of that played into what happened this session. So the primary objective, as I mentioned, is to adopt the budgets. The state has 3 budgets. The operating budget funds all state agencies, state agency operations, the largest of which is the K through 12 education system. The 2023-25 operating budget is $69.8 billion. Some noteworthy allocations to mention are $20 million for grants to local governments for updating and implementing comprehensive plans and development regulations. $150 million to transition individuals living in encampments to housing, over $250 million for various behavioral health services, $29.6 million for therapeutic court grants through the Administrative Office of the Courts, and $9 million through the Healthcare Authority. And this last one is significant for Issaquah because the city has previously received a grant through AOC that helps cover the cost for community court. So that grant opportunity will be available again as a result of this budget. The capital budget funds public and nonprofit construction projects that are non-transportation related. It's a $9 billion budget, primarily funded through the sale of bonds. There's roughly $95 million in remaining bond capacity for the supplemental budget year. Over $231 million was allocated to local community projects throughout the state, which is a big jump from the previous budget, which had $160 million allocated to that funding. The capital budget makes major investments in housing, homelessness, services and facilities, behavioral health, and education. And if you like the capital budget, please tell Senator Mullet, because it was his first year being the lead capital budget writer for his caucus. The third and final budget is the transportation budget. It's $13.5 billion, and it's the first budget that incorporated the implementation of the Move Ahead Washington package. The revenues that fund the transportation budget, which are primarily the gas tax, are continuing to decline. Heading into session, many communities were concerned because the governor's budget delayed funding for some really key projects. And for the most part, the legislature was able to honor previous commitments that they had made about the timing and the amount of funding for those key projects. They also provided certainty over the next 6 years about when that funding will be made available. This was also the first budget to incorporate revenues from the Climate Commitment Act. Those revenues are scattered throughout all 3 budgets. And this money is money that must be spent on carbon reducing programs and projects. So moving on to discuss the city's top priorities. The city identified 3 priorities for the 2023 session. The first was a capital budget request of $700,000 for improvements at the Issaquah Senior Center Plaza, which is part of the broader Veterans Memorial Consolidated Park project. Representative Callan and Senator Mullet were our champions on this request. And since they're both in leadership positions in capital budget, that made sense to them. Ultimately, our request was included in the final budget, along with an additional 3% to cover the administrative expense that's charged by the Department of Commerce. So that's why the full amount is slightly higher than our request. A large part of our success on this, it is noteworthy that our legislators that championed this have leadership positions in the capital budget, but it also makes sense that we brought forward a project that made sense for them to fund and to prioritize. Was the last dollar in, the city had already committed significant resources to the project. In many ways, it was a no-brainer for them. And so as we consider future capital budget requests, future projects that we want the state's partnership with, it's important to remember that. The second priority was policy rather than budget focused, and that was a request for the legislature to increase housing availability and affordability. The Department of Commerce reported last year, they released a report that stated Washington needs roughly 1 million new homes by 2044 to accommodate the projected population growth. And that of those homes, 525,000 need to be affordable at or below 50% of the area median income. That information was referenced many times throughout session and prompted the legislature to pass policies aimed at bringing more homes to construction or more homes to market and reducing the cost of constructing those homes. Senator Mollett sponsored a bill to help local governments improve their permit processing timelines, since builders have said that is a significant contributor to the cost of construction. There were 2 separate bills passed that help reform the liability for condominium construction, aimed at increasing opportunities for home ownership. But perhaps the most discussed and longest coming policy that passed this session was on middle housing. The momentum for this bill has been building for years, and the legislature was incredibly motivated to reduce construction costs. And one of the major cost drivers for new homes is the price of land. Allowing more units to be built on the same amount of land was appealing to lawmakers. And there were easily 10 dozen different versions of this bill over the years. So it can be kind of difficult to track what was in a proposed version and what's in the version that actually became law. So I'm going to start off by saying what the bill doesn't do. This does not allow for skyrise development in single-family neighborhoods, and it does not prohibit the construction of single-family homes. It does establish a minimum number of units that must be authorized on all lots zoned primarily for residential. In Issaquah, the city must allow at least 2 units on all lots and 4 units on lots within a quarter-mile walking distance of major transit service. An accessory dwelling unit in the bill is considered a unit. And essentially what that means is a city that already allows ADUs on every lot is already in compliance with that version or that component of the bill. I also want to mention that this does not mean that 2 units have to be built on a lot. It just means that they can be allowed, or they must be allowed. That the same goes for the 4 units on a lot. It remains up to property owners to decide how many units they want on their lot. There is also an alternative pathway for compliance, and that allows cities to implement the requirement in at least 75% of all lots that are zoned for a single family. And then there's specific limitations on things that can and can't be included in the remaining 25%. So it does provide some flexibility for communities that may need it. The bill does not preempt current homeowners associations, but it will apply to future HOAs that are formed after the effective date of the bill. The version that passed the legislature was a compromise, both on the part of housing advocates who wanted to see greater density authorized on all lots, and on the part of local governments who did not want their land use decisions to be preempted at the state level. So as a city, we were heavily engaged in the policy development, providing feedback to our legislators on what aspects would and would not work for Issaquah. At one point, there was a version of the bill that authorized 4 units within a quarter-mile of all parks. For Issaquah, that would have been an effective upzone of the entire city, and so we shared concerns with that concept. And really, the reason behind that is wanting to minimize development that's car dependent. And ultimately, that provision was removed, and it was limited just down to a quarter-mile within transit. Because I know this is a really important topic, I'm just going to pause quickly, see if there's any questions on this before I move on to talking about the remaining priorities.
Not seeing any raised microphones.
Okay.
I'll just put a quick thank you in there for working on this one too. I think I emailed you more than anybody during the session. Thank you.
All right, well, our third priority was transportation related, and the 2022 legislature adopted the Move Ahead Washington package that allocates $640 million to the State Route 18 widening and safety improvements. But as we've talked about before, that $640 million was not specified in time over the 16-year package. And so our objective of this session was to ensure that that funding was available in the timeline needed to complete those improvements as soon as we are ready. So this past session, we continued our work with partners at the Southeast Area Legislative Transportation Coalition, or CLTC, and we requested that those funds be phased accordingly. The governor's budget pushed out the project more than 4 years later than what WashDOT had recommended. And ultimately, we were successful in having those funds phased according to the project timeline, and you can see that on the screen in front of you. This was the direct result of engagement and leadership from Representative Ramos and Senator Mullet. So I want to make sure that they get the credit for that. In addition to the city's top priorities, you also have a policy manual that states the city's position on dozens of other topics. And I'm going to briefly review some highlights from 3 different categories. In the category of public safety, there were 2 primary policies discussed. The first was police vehicular pursuits. In 2021, the legislature passed a law requiring probable cause rather than reasonable suspicion to believe that the person in the vehicle has committed certain offenses before an officer can engage in a vehicular pursuit. This higher threshold has caused concern among many law enforcement agencies as they've experienced more people eluding or trying to get away from police. Advocates of the reform were concerned that reverting back to reasonable suspicion would result in more dangerous law enforcement pursuits. And so after some really unique legislative maneuvers, Senate Bill 5352 passed the legislature. It lowers the evidentiary threshold for vehicular pursuits to reasonable suspicion, but only for specific crimes. Those crimes do not include property crimes. That was a major sticking point for some legislators who wanted to see the bill go farther. For others, the bill was a reversal of the progress that was made in the 2021 session. The bill ultimately passed because it was a compromise, and it had enough votes, it had enough members of the legislature that agreed that this was progress over current law. The second public safety topic is the reason the legislature will be returning to Olympia tomorrow for a special session. The current law on possession of controlled substances is set to expire on June 30th. That law was intentionally established as a temporary solution following the Supreme Court's ruling in early 2021 that drug possession was not a felony. There were 4 different Blake fix bills that were introduced this session. The primary vehicle was Senate Bill 5536. In the Senate, it passed with a bipartisan mix of votes and established possession as a gross misdemeanor. And then it outlined the procedure for pretrial diversion and a pathway for vacation of a conviction. And when it got to the House, it was amended substantially. It established possession as a misdemeanor rather than a gross misdemeanor. And it included drug use in public places, among many other differences. Because the bill passed the House in a different version than it passed the Senate, it had to go back to the Senate. If a bill passes in 2 different versions, it doesn't pass the legislature. So a committee was formed to develop a compromise. Ultimately, that compromise was brought forward and failed to receive the votes in the final hours of the legislative session. Since then, the governor has called for a special session to begin tomorrow. Special sessions last for 30 days. And over the weekend, we heard that there is a bipartisan agreement that has been reached. The 4 different caucuses were briefed on that agreement this afternoon. They're expected to return tomorrow at 10 a.m. to vote on that bill. We will see whether there are the votes to pass it. Until they vote, we don't know one way or the other. If for some reason the agreement does not pass tomorrow, they do still have 30 days under this special session to reach an agreement. And if this special session lapses, another one can be called. Really, the big deadline looming is the June 30th deadline. The second category is finances, and I'm going to keep the remaining of the presentation brief. I know this is a lot of information. 2 topics I want to mention. The first is the cap of the property tax growth at 1%. There were 3 different bills that would have increased this cap to 3%, all in slightly different ways. None of those 3 bills advanced. One received a public hearing, but ultimately none of them were voted out of committee. This continues to be a really challenging topic for the legislature, and I don't see in the near future a change to that law. The state did continue to honor their distribution of revenues to local governments, which is noteworthy only because historically those have been on the chopping block. Then the final category is environment. There were dozens of environment-related bills that passed the legislature, but two that the city supported are House Bill 1181 and Senate Bill 5144. 1181 incorporates climate change planning into the Growth Management Act and provides funding for local governments' planning work. 5144 creates a product stewardship program for household batteries that will be funded by battery manufacturers. Both bills are the result of years of stakeholder work and persistence and compromise, and were supported by the city. The final item I want to mention on the topic of environment is a $250,000 appropriation in the operating budget for King County Conservation District to reduce the impacts of artificial lighting on the behavior of salmon and other aquatic life in Lake Sammamish and Lake Washington. And this was the direct result of support and engagement from many of you on council and was championed by Representative Ramos. So, now that the session is over, what comes next? Well, a special session starting tomorrow. Hopefully it'll just be a single day and we'll be done. But no matter what, we will remain engaged and help shape the final policy. Following that, I would encourage the city to consider ways of thanking your legislators, not just for representing the city's interests, but for their dedication to public service. You all know it can be a thankless job, so simply receiving encouragement and appreciation from fellow electeds is important. With all the bills the legislature passed and the funding that was made available, there is a lot of work to do. City staff who already have their plates full will have even more to do in the coming months and years to ensure that the funding that was allocated to the city is used in the allotted timeframe and that projects are delivered. And then lastly, I know it sounds crazy since we just ended, but it's never too soon to begin thinking about next year and what our priorities should be for the 2024 session. In the fall, I will return in person with you all and will update the city's legislative documents to reflect the items that were accomplished this year and add new items, recognizing that it's not going to be a budget year and it's going to be a short session. So we'll keep that in mind as we consider priorities. And with that, I am happy to take any questions.
Questions? Deputy Council President?
Thank you for your outstanding work. I had one quick question in reading the report. Thank you for putting that together too. One of our important city priorities was staffing levels at WSDOT, the State Department of Transportation, and you had described it as some of that funding being swept from vacant positions and being kind of reappropriated. How should we be thinking about that? Is this the new normal in terms of kind of staffing levels at WSDOT, or is there a considered effort in the legislature to get to that eventually?
Yeah,
Washington State Department of Transportation. Did you say that? Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I did include that in the written report because I had more space and time to cover all those details. But yes, the transportation budget writers basically squeezed every penny that they could out of resources that weren't being used. And there were many vacant positions throughout various departments at WSDOT. And so rather than those positions remaining vacant and that money going unused, the legislature said, we're going to use that money. If you need those positions filled, let us know. We've provided you flexibility in order to fill those positions, but we need to use the money on something this biennium, not just continue to wait for the positions to be filled. Obviously, the department is not happy about that. They have the positions slotted because they need people in those positions. I think it's a little bit of a, if WSDOT does truly need those positions, the legislature has provided a way for the funding to be flexible within the biennium for them to fill those positions. So it's a matter of WSDOT then saying, okay, we found the people, we need the positions, give us the money.
Great. Additional questions? Great. Well, Shelley, we're not allowed to take questions from the audience. I'm sorry. However, Shelley's going to return to the audience and you can ask a question. Sorry about that. Shelley, thank you for all your work. You were amazing during this session, and I wasn't kidding. It almost felt like we worked at the same place. I was talking to you every day on multiple different subjects. So thank you for your promptness in notifying us of all the issues, working with my Chief of Staff, Tina, on making sure that our staff got to review this legislation. There was a lot that impacted cities this time, and many of it was a one-size-fits-all. But I do believe with the work Senator Mullet in particular on that Senate bill, I'm very appreciative. Many of the concerns that I had about our hillside neighborhoods being adjacent to the wildland urban interface got addressed. There's a few that I'm still kind of struggling with, but thank you so much. And I also want to let the council know that the CLTC group that Shelley was referring to is also going to be doing a representative senator thank you session in Black Diamond, and I'm helping to coordinate that, and we'll let you know. But it was a big upward push this year to make sure that that Highway 18 project stayed on schedule. So make sure if we can get you that date as fast as we can. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I believe you have a question in the audience too, someone wants to ask, because Shelley is headed off to another event, so if you want to grab her ear, grab her ear. The next thing we are moving on to this evening is audience comments, and this is the time when members of the public can address the council, either in person or virtually. Those who signed up in advance will be called upon first, and if you are joining us virtually and would like to make comments, please raise your virtual hand or send the host a chat message. If you're on your phone, that could mean pressing *3. If you joined by computer or smartphone, look for a hand icon. If you're in the room and did not sign up, I will ask for other speakers before closing this portion of the meeting, so you will be able to provide some input. City Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak for general audience comments or indicated a desire to speak this evening?
Yes.
Thank you. So if you are making comments, please direct your comments to the whole council and not individuals. And while this is not a question and answer session, we will contact you to follow up if needed. When you are recognized, please unmute your microphone for virtual attendees or step to the lectern if you're here in person with us. State your name, address, and relationship to the city, and speak clearly and pause frequently. And please limit your comments to 5 minutes. If you are attending virtually and you do not respond after your name or phone number is called, or if your connection is lost unexpectedly, the meeting will need to proceed. You are encouraged to rejoin the meeting if able. Personal attacks, obscene language, derogatory remarks, and disruptive behavior will not be permitted. Citizen comments, written and verbal, are an important aspect of the public process, and the city takes your comments seriously. We thank you for taking the time to address us. City Clerk, can you please identify the first person who signed up to speak tonight?
Yes, David Wagner.
Come on up, David.
There it is. Okay. Council and Mayor, my name is David Wagner, 360 Northwest Dogwood Street. I'm here tonight as service officer for VFW Post 3436. You'll see a picture of our oldest member, 102 years old, Earl Jones. Earl went to join Post Everlasting last week. We had a wonderful gift from one of our veterans who provided the city with flags for another year. We've been doing this since about 2008. And if you're keeping track with 10 flags a year, that's a little over 120 flags, probably 140 flags. Something else Earl contributed a lot. He was in World War II. Got to tell you a little secret about him. He told me he designed the yoke in the B-52, and that's what the pilots fly with. And I believe he probably did. Earl worked on airplanes in India. If you're not familiar with World War II, a lot of U.S. planes came across the hump to support China against Japan. And so Earl did all that work and then came home, raised a family, and served in our VFW post. So we want to take this opportunity to dedicate these flags to the city of Issaquah on behalf of Earl Jones. One other thing I want to mention tonight is we'll be having our annual Memorial Day activities up at the field cemetery. Saturday, we'll be putting out flags and crosses. City is welcome, so this is a free announcement I get to do on TV. We'd like to have you come up and help us. It's such an honor. We have 588 veterans buried in Upper and Lower Hillside Cemetery. We consider it an honor. Our service will be on Monday, May 29th at 10 o'clock, and then we'll be taking down the cemetery at 6 p.m. on that same evening. So please feel free to come up and we'll enjoy it. No B-25 flying this year. They moved to Spokane. That's a long flight over here. So last thing I want to talk about, and our illustrious mayor has been there with me, we actually retire and dispose of flags every year at Flintoff's beach property. I want to give you an idea of how many we've done. We started that in 2006, and to the date this year, in April, of disposing of another 250 flags. We've done over 8,000 flags, and we've taught over 600 Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, and Girl Scouts how to properly dispose of flags. My time is up. Nice to see everybody. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Dave, and thank you. City Clerk, is there anybody else signed up or online or in the room that would like to speak?
Bridget, you're signed up. Would you like to make comments again?
Just one more comment. The legislative summary reminded me to call out the fact that we had a fabulous gun sense legislative session this year, and at the risk of being repetitive, I'm so close to this, I feel like everybody knows, but I will just say, for the record, that our legislature passed things that will now move us from the 10th best state up into the top 5. And those included 4 critical bills to distribute information through schools about safe storage, to allow our citizens to pursue gun manufacturers for liability issues, i.e., through the courts, a 10-day waiting period and required training for all firearm purchases, and last but not least, the assault weapons ban. So I just really want to thank everyone who was involved in electing this Congress for Washington, because we can do great things. We're not done yet, but just those bills will save lives. So
Thank you, Bridget. And I'm going to get the city clerk to hand you the sign-in sheet so we can collect the rest of your information that we need for the public record. Thank you. Anybody online? And I'll also check in the room as well. Who do we have online?
Yes. Paul Winterstein is online and would like to make comments. Paul, I'm making you a panelist now. You should be able to unmute and can choose to turn your video on.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfect. Welcome, Paul.
All right, thank you. Hey, my name is Paul Winterstein, and I'm glad to be wearing orange tonight. I'm also the executive director of the Issaquah History Museums. A couple comments real quick about ID 1432, which is later in the program tonight, the informational update on the ARPA funding projects. One comment about the Eck House. Really do appreciate, we at the History Museums have been fortunate to have a number of points of contact with Jeff and his staff, Jennifer Fink as well. We've gone over those plans. They've presented to us multiple times. We really appreciate that engagement part that the staff has gone through. When it comes to the Eck House, which of course is up there on Confluence Park, we as an organization, our board has not taken any formal position on this. We just didn't get ourselves organized that way. But there have been a lot of comments, and I wanted to share with you that in general, both from board members and from staff, we're in support of that plan as it's currently stated, and the goals for the Eck House, which include like that envisioning it as a public amenity and to celebrate its history, and hopefully also by landmarking it. That suite of ideas is we have general support for. And we're actually, very glad that the house and the wash house will be preserved. And the idea of then, making that a public gathering place, connecting it with the park, and yet still telling the many histories are there. I think that's going to be key, and that's another way we look forward to working with the city to, to complete that build out of that area, because there are many histories in that place. Of course, there is a natural history of the nearby confluence. Of course, there's the indigenous people's history in this area and in that particular area. And of course, we have the settlers' history, including, of course, of the Eck family, which is a fascinating history of itself. The gentleman who built that house, was a miner. That wash house is where he would come back from the coal mines and wash himself out and get in clean clothes before he came into the house. And there is a living granddaughter of the ex who built that house here in Issaquah. I spoke with her a couple weeks ago, and one of her fond memories growing up was as a grandchild celebrating birthday parties at that house and actually playing in the wash house, which I thought was a really good memory as it relates to the playground that's nearby in the first phase of this plan to create a space in a sheltered area so that people and families enjoying the play area had a really good destination. Who knows, and possibly for hosting birthday parties and celebrating, just like the granddaughter of the ex has a memory of using the wash house. And so our intent, of course, at the trails, for history museums is to support, that theme, to help also in phase 2 as your partner in History Matters. When it comes to looking for alternative sources for funding, how can we get engaged and assist with fundraising through grant applications? I definitely will be talking with staff about those opportunities. And kind of wrap that up, this is a unique opportunity. I think you're going to see it later on in Pedestrian Park. There's a real natural theme there. In all of our history, there's a really strong nexus between a natural history like water, confluence of rivers, and then the people history that got there. And this is a good theme, a good way for us to not only tell our history, connect people with our history, but also connect them with the natural setting where this is. And we have a great opportunity to do that, not only at the Eck House, but also at Pedestrian Park. And then the last thing I'll mention is that there is going to be, if you go forward with this plan, that pathway that connects Pedestrian Park and the Senior Center, that will be crossing the tracks that are right adjacent to the train depot. I did meet with a volunteer of ours who's a real expert in those tracks, and he was telling me he has some knowledge about ways to really make a good, safe crossing of those tracks, and yet still retaining the possible future use of those tracks. And that is kind of one of the pathways that we're on. I'm currently doing a feasibility study and fact-finding about what it would take for us to get, back on and using those tracks. So that idea of retaining that while still making that a safe crossing for people between the pedestrian and the Senior Center, definitely look forward, and we'll do what we can to work with the city to achieve those means as well. So those are my comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. Lots of information there. I just want to point out that I hope you're able to stay for the informational item tonight. To date, the council has really just had conversations on the ARPA portion of it. I believe the Parks and Community Services Director has provided information on potential phasing, but the council, this will really be the first time tonight that they'll get to provide input on that tonight. So it's almost like you're teasing it up for them, which is great. So thank you for that. Thank you for your comments. Tisha, is there anyone else online?
We don't have any other members of the public online.
Super. And is there anyone else in the room? Corey, why don't you come up to the microphone?
Good evening. My name is Corey Christensen, longtime resident Squaw Mountain. I'd also like to talk about the Eck House and the Confluence Park and follow up on Paul's comments from the Historical Society. And I'd also like to say thank you to the Parks Department for their opening line about to save the Eck House as an amenity, because that's a large step from just a few months ago where the house was going to be torn down and one wall was going to be kept with the picnic shelter. So we've moved a long way, but we have not moved far enough. The other thing I wanted to say is that this isn't something new. This is part of something that goes back over 15 years when Confluence Park was created, and it's the confluence of the Issaquah Creek, but it's also three families, the Anderson family, the Pritt family, and the Eck family. The Anderson family donated their house, barn, to the city. Pritt's there, no house there, and then the city had to buy the property that the Eck house is on. Without going into too much of the past history that's passed, is that we already lost the Anderson house and barn. That got torn down. There was a bit of controversy over that. We had to pay grant funding back. And the last piece of the historical preservation is the Eck house. And so I bring that up because we've sort of already whittled it down to that. And that one of the largest components of Confluence Park was the historical preservation part. And so it's quite exciting that we're moving forward, but I'd really like to ask the council to make a little bit more of a commitment and give the Parks Department just a little bit of a push here. And what the push is what's backwards is that in their search for grant funding, we're at the point right now where we sign up to be landmarked. And going back, again, 15 years, our longtime former Issaquah History Museum's director, Erica Menez, did a fantastic job with the history of the house, the history of the Eck family, collecting all the information. That's all there. Julie Kohler, who was the King County Preservation Director, also did a lot of work on the house and all of the background. And that information is all in the consultants' reports from 15 years ago, the master plan, and then the agenda that the city council, I think it was 2008, voted to buy the land that the Eck House is on. So the historical preservation component has already been decided. It's just a matter of pushing the go button. What's backwards in tonight's report from the Parks Department is to get the grant funding, you have to be landmarked. And the background information for the landmarking was basically done 15 years ago. All that needs to be done is that information collected, handed to a consultant, and it costs $6,000 or $7,000. They produce the report. That then goes to the Landmarking Commission, who then landmarks the house. And the house, we have so many friends in the King County Historical Preservation for culture and the state on landmarking this house. Matter of fact, longtime Issaquah resident Ella Moore is on the Landmarking Commission, and Ella 15 years ago was a strong advocate for this. And basically all the people involved in preservation and landmarking just basically have been waiting the 15 years for something to happen. So right now, let's make that happen. The second thing is Director Watling has mentioned that there's a possibility of having the shelter and the house go simultaneously. I think it's too much to ask for them to go fully simultaneously, but the house does have almost $200,000 in an account from when it had a fire, and its main thing that it needs a foundation. And that's important to do in conjunction with the shelter because the height of the foundation is affected by what the ADA access will be on each end, and plus you're raising the house and all that. So it would be much better to do that together. And then the second part of that that's important is doing that shows that the city has a commitment to the house, and then the combination of that commitment and going forward with the grant, with the landmarking will get us grant funding. And there's a possibility of up to $500,000 in new money for that house. So in conclusion, please give a little bit of a push and let's get this done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Corey. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to step up and make comments this evening? City Clerk, has anyone identified themselves online? Great. Well, thank you. We got to hear from the VFW representative this evening talking about activities for Memorial Day, Monday, May 29th, 10 o'clock at the Hillside Cemetery, and also flag disposals. We also heard again from Moms Demand Action, a call for gun safety about some really big gains in the legislature. this session, and from two speakers tonight about a huge desire on one of your informational items tonight. Great interest in the Eck House. So thank you all for coming, and thank you all for sharing. As a reminder, written comments can be submitted at any time to the City Council at citycouncil@issaquah.gov. And the next item of business this evening is our consent calendar. I do not have any remarks on tonight's consent calendar, and I'm going to look to see if the committee chairs have anything they need to report out. Not seeing an indication of that. The consent calendar was distributed to, The consent calendar was distributed to council in advance, and if authorized, the items on the consent calendar will be considered together and approved by one motion. Have the payables and payroll been reviewed?
They have.
Yes.
Thank you. Does any council member desire to remove any item from the consent calendar and consider it under regular business? Not seeing an indication. Is there a motion? Council President.
I move to approve the consent calendar as distributed.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar as presented. Is there any council discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously 7-0. We do not have any regular business this evening, but we do have committee regional reports and an informational update coming your way. So let's start with the council members. Councilmember Joe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The only announcement I have is Cascade Water Alliance will hold their board meeting on May 24th at 3:30 in the afternoon. You can attend by Zoom or in person at the new Cascade Water Alliance office off of Southeast 8th. Thank you.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you. Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. On May 11th, Eastside Human Services Forum held a regular board meeting, and we continued the board's strategic planning discussion. We also welcomed Sammamish Council member Karen Howe to the board, so that was a very happy event. This week, on Wednesday, the Eastside Human Services Forum will hold a meeting with City Human Services staff to further the strategic plan discussion, and the next full board meeting will be held on June the 8th. Then Eastside Transportation Partnership met on May the 12th, last Friday, held its regular meeting. It was quite an interesting and information-packed meeting for 50 minutes. We covered a whole lot of topics. So the first one was Metro's SAFE initiative. We had an update on that, that involves the safety and security of the buses in the bus system. And I think of most importance or most interest perhaps to us is that Metro has initiated a behavioral health pilot program at the Aurora and Burien Transit Centers. They are sending a team of 2 behavioral health specialists. They are stationed there at each place from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. each day to provide assistance and referrals to individuals in crisis. Mitchell Lloyd, who's the lead employee for this program, said that Metro is learning a lot, and that sounded so familiar to me because I think we learned a lot when our first behavioral health specialists were assigned to the police department, and that they are adjusting the program as it develops. I did ask about whether or not they were going to extend that program, and the same answer that we know came back, and that was that it's very difficult to recruit behavioral health specialists right now. And so they are seeing how this works out, and then at the end of the first year, they will evaluate and see if they want to expand. But I'm excited because certainly this has been something that customers and passengers have been asking for quite some time. So the second item was we learned all about the new federal grants that are available to cities, and so I'm sure that the staff people that were in attendance got that information. And then we had a lively discussion about the service cutbacks that were announced by Metro last week. And I wanted to thank Thomas Valdries for the excellent summary that he sent to the council. And if anyone in the public is interested in that, I'd be happy to pass it along. But we are, in fact, Issaquah is losing service on the routes 214, the routes 216, and the routes 217. And those changes were made under the Metro General Manager's Emergency Proclamation. powers in response to a severe driver and support personnel shortage, and also as an attempt to stabilize the system in response to the many impacts of the pandemic. So it came as a surprise to many people that were at the Eastside Transportation Partnership, and that was expressed. Katie Chalmers, who's their lead transit planner, talked to us for quite some time and did an excellent job of explaining why the emergency powers they felt really needed to be used. And they did not have time to do a public process to make that decision. So tomorrow I will chair the Connect to Community Advisory Group meeting tomorrow afternoon at 2. And then this Wednesday, the Regional Transit Committee will meet. And we will be, the agenda is a review of Metro's flexible services and Metro's capital toolkit for partners. And that ends my report.
That's a big one.
Yeah, it was a big one.
Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have one report and one upcoming meeting. On May 2nd, the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee met, and we had one item on our agenda, which was ID 1411, Adoption of 2021 Building and Fire Codes. This was presented by James Gray, the building official of the city, and the committee was fully supportive of the code updates, and we did ask for more information to be brought forward as other cities are adopting their updates, if they are going above and beyond and having success with that. We did ask that that information be brought back to us, but we were fully supportive of the code updates, and we did recommend that this go forward to be on a consent calendar at a future date. I have one upcoming meeting, which is this Thursday, May 18th. There will be a WIRA 8 Salmon Recovery Council meeting. WIRA 8 is the technical name of our watershed. And there are a number of items on the agenda, including one relevant to what Shelley Helder, our lobbyist, touched on earlier, which is we will have an update on the legislative priorities recap, and we will hear about funding programs and relevant budget provisos supporting Priority Salmon Recovery Council priorities. And among those, as was mentioned, there will be a budget proviso for continuing the work to reduce light pollution. Specifically, we are working on Lake Sammamish, but we look to expand that wider than Lake Sammamish and also Lake Washington. And I have worked closely with Representative Ramos, as well as the WIRA 8 Salmon Recovery Council and the King Conservation District on that work. This is very important also because we are using Title 18's dock lighting as that part of our code, which reduces light pollution, as the basis of a model ordinance. So Issaquah is really leading on this light pollution issue, which is very important for salmon recovery, and we're very excited to have received that funding from the state to continue that work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ray.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. The Mobility and Infrastructure Committee met on May 9th with a single agenda item, ID 1318, the 2024 to 2029 Capital Improvement Plan. As part of that, the committee received updates that included an update from on the Capital Finance Community Task Force, their work and recommendations, a review of the new and improved their new and improved criteria for evaluating capital improvement plan items, the CIP umbrella goals and specific council goals. I'm not going to recap all of those, but I encourage you to take a look at the goals and the evaluation criteria. The Mobility and Infrastructure Committee looked at CIP projects for water, sewer, and transportation. We also looked at a potential transportation benefit district, or TBD, 0.1% sales tax as a means to raise funds for needed CIP transportation projects. The committee was supportive of the goals and outcomes that were presented. The committee was also supportive of moving forward with further defining the councilmatic 0.1% TBD sales tax, and the committee was supportive of the intelligent transportation system and the Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized projects to be funded with a potential new revenue stream. And that concludes my report this evening.
Thank you, Councilmember Ray. Councilmember Mertz, welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's good to be back. The Sound Cities Association Public Issues Committee met last Wednesday for an online virtual meeting at 7 p.m. No action was taken. The Council Services, Safety, and Parks Committee will be meeting tomorrow night here in Chambers at 6:30. And surprise, surprise, on our agenda is ID 1319, 2024 to 2029 Capital Improvement Plan. This concludes my report.
Thank you. Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you. Just to announce that last Thursday, May 11th, the Eastside Fire and Rescue Board of Directors met. As I stated in my last report, we had our presentation on the deployment and operations model for Eastside Fire and Rescue for the agency. It was very interesting. I'm getting an e-copy to share out with the council if you'd like. I also have a hard copy in my bag with me tonight if you'd like to borrow it. Also, we have let you know previously that we have responded to requests for proposal by Duval Fire District and the City of Mercer Island, and that continues on. It's currently in progress, and we'll keep you in the loop if anything changes there. Our next board meeting is Thursday, June 8th, and that concludes my report.
Thank you. Council President.
Thank you. Short report here. The Puget Sound Regional Council's Growth Management Policy Board will meet on June 1st, and the agenda has not yet been released. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Council President. There is no significant mayor's report this evening. I don't have any items, but I did want to remind everybody that there is an executive session this evening to discuss pending potential litigation per RCW 42.30.110(1) The item is expected to take 30 minutes, and no action is anticipated in open session. So the next item on the agenda this evening is the informational update, ID 1432. It's an informational update on the American Recovery Rescue Plan Act. It's the federal program that is providing funding to state, counties, and local governments. And we're going to talk about the ARPA-funded parks projects. And I'd like to invite Parks and Community Services Director Jeff Watling to make a presentation. Welcome, Jeff.
Mayor Pauly, thank you so much. Good evening, Council. Great to be here. Thank you as well, City Clerk Geezer, for agreeing to drive the PowerPoint presentation. Please don't be intimidated by the 40-some slides. I'm only going to spend 2 or 3 minutes on each slide, so should be quick. No, actually, so much goes into the design process. I thought some of these visuals are very helpful in sort of telling the story. I plan to peruse through a number of these relatively quickly. Next slide, Tisha, thank you. So the purpose tonight is, as stated in the staff report, to provide you a progress report on the 2 ARPA-funded projects. Thank you so much for your authorization of funding in the 23-24 budget process. The progress report really outlines a lot of the really important initial design work that we've had underway this first quarter, and we'll also outline next steps as both of these projects really are at a pretty key point of beginning to head into their final design and permitting process this summer. Next slide. A little bit of background. Again, through the conversations we had this summer with the Park Board and with all of you around how to consider investments into ARPA, these 2 park projects kind of rose to the top through an evaluation process. I think of really important note, not only are these 2 really important projects that were part of our park strategic plan process dating back to 2018, but they really serve as 2 key parks, really 2 key pearls on the green necklace. Knowing it's such a vision for all of you of really thinking of a connected system, park and trail system. These are 2 pretty critical parks and investments along that node. So the $4 million was identified for Pedestrian Park Senior Center, as well as investments at Confluence Park and the Eck House. Early design work, you've heard from some public comment tonight. We had a lot of public engagement already this first quarter that's really helped to inform the designs that you're seeing tonight. The preferred scope and concepts for both these projects we really feel are nearing a completion point, so really look forward to hearing your feedback on that. The Park Board has been just essential in this work. Our design team at Methuen Architects have been just fantastic in their responsiveness. I also want to note Jennifer Fink, who served as project manager on these 2 projects, has done incredible work. As you may know, Jennifer has left the city and is heading to the city of Maple Valley, so wish her immense good luck and immense goodwill, and just thank her for all the great work that she's done here with the city. But these projects will continue on. The visuals shared, as I said earlier, really are meant to represent just a lot of the work that's happened Public spaces done well need to tell a story for that public community. And we really feel like these two projects, as they reach their design and we begin to permit and see these constructed, will hopefully be immensely reflective of Issaquah. So pedestrian park, senior center plaza first. As I mentioned, the park board has really been instrumental in this work. An ad hoc group, a group of 4 park board members, have really done a lot of work and been very helpful in a lot of our conversations with the design consultant team. In January and February, did a lot of work with them. In March, we had a public survey that went out, as well as hosted an open house that talked about really 2 really broad concepts for pedestrian park senior center. That feedback really helped to inform the concept that you're seeing tonight. A lot of engagement, not only with residents, but the neighboring businesses, Issaquah Historical Museum, that you heard from Executive Director tonight, the Creative Art District Board, Downtown Issaquah Association, Visit Issaquah, our senior center patrons. All that feedback really in so many ways has been immensely positive and really leaning into this investment at Pedestrian Park and the Senior Center Plaza. Next slide. The proposed design that you're going to see, we refer to this as Creekside Table, and I think the visuals will help tell that story, why we think that is such a key name. That's not smoke that you see there, that's actually a LiDAR of the creek. So a great really representation of where we think just water plays such a key role in this valley and needs to play a key role in this project. Next slide. Some themes that we heard from all this public feedback and the survey that really carried into this design. The idea of water in this space really was immensely supportive, but it was immensely supportive in let's do water to the right scale. Let's be environmentally sensitive and thoughtful and not create a huge, massive water feature, but something that really reflects our carefulness and thoughtfulness as we do park features. Really a lot of excitement around the social spaces and the Creekside Table. Desire for this space to be really flexible and open and something that supports Front Street, and the economic vitality of Front Street becomes an energetic place that people want to gather. That doesn't always necessarily resonate right now. Making sure we resonate and reinforce our environmental approach, strengthening that relationship with Old Town, with our history, and not only our cultural history, but our natural history, our history of all peoples, of all community groups that have been in this valley, including the Coast Salish and other tribes that have called this home for many, many millennia. Engaging this space 365 days a year, thinking of this as a space to gather at night, were all priorities from the community. We showed some shelter options for how to, with the senior center, and this idea of Creekside Table really resonated at the senior center as well. Next slide. So Creekside Table, this idea of Creekside and Table really meant to reflect both the natural environment of Issaquah, but then also the town and the community and communities, as I said earlier, of really all people groups that have thought of this valley as home. Next slide. Really getting into this idea of authentic nature. How do we make a design that really talks about the stream, the valley, the geology, the hillsides that so define Issaquah, and just our nature and the many stewards that have stewarded this land, and then authentic community. This idea of crossroads. Issaquah has always been a crossroads community, and I think the next slide really reflects that. The next couple of slides. Again, those are just fun little doodles that just talk about creative process and what the Methuen team did. You may have recognized this photo if you've seen this photo before. This is Issaquah circa 1930s, I believe. You know, the east, west, and north, south connections of the valley. I think we feel this now with I-90. We feel this now with so many traffic coming through Issaquah, but Issaquah has always been a crossroads. Again, from the Coast Salish peoples to now, and how do we really recognize that and celebrate that? Next slide. This idea of water, as we think of water, as we think of a creek, how do we make this moving water? How do we make this living water? Next slide begins to talk about and really, I think, represent shapes, textures. A creek and water in a creek really has an energy and a flow to it. Next slide, really, how do we thoughtfully think of planting? What landscaping do we put around both of these spaces? Recognizing both of these spaces hopefully are a first touch and a first phase of what we do around Depot Park, what we do around Veterans Memorial. As you may recall, this phase is really meant as a first investment of further unifying all of this public space. Sorry, I'm pointing outside for those watching at home, but all these sort of disjointed public spaces that have coexisted for so long, how do we start to connect them? Next slide. Going from sort of that natural valley to community and the built environment, how do we pull some of these built structures and history of the town into this space? Next slide. And that sort of culminates to this idea, the design process, again, that the Methuen team has really helped us think, and that's this idea of connecting nature and town and creating in that what has always felt like a really small space of the pedestrian plaza, but can do so much, and I think really do some thoughtful reflection of creating a really cool public space. Next slide. So this starts to really take the shape of the concept and the design that, again, has really resonated with the community, and that's what's sort of being called gravel bar, which will be this sort of raised grass area that is really a formal and informal gathering space, a place where people can sit. How do we take those existing maple trees and reinforce them with some other trees? What would be the east side of the plaza would be more open and feel like the town. That's very intentional, and that when you're at the intersection of Sunset and Front Street, with this configuration, you'd be able to see the Depot building. Now suddenly the Depot pops and becomes something that would sort of draw you further into the space. Next slide. A couple of cross sections and sort of cross views. The upper one, again, would be as if you were standing there on Sunset looking through the plaza. The lower one is a cross section if you were standing sort of on the wall at the dim sum restaurant looking towards Jack's. This is what you would see. One, I think, really cool nuance of this design, and was so thoughtful and actually came from some public comment we had as we hosted the meeting. You might notice that this raised grass area, this raised turf area, has a slight slant to it from back to front. That's to really create accessibility and not have to create a ramp, but make it accessible for all, whether wheelchairs or able-bodied individuals. And so some really thoughtful, subtle designs into making this a really cool gathering space. One more image, next slide. Sort of shows you this water feature that's going to feel like a sort of ever-changing creek. Again, not a massive, deep water feature pool, but really soft use of water and texture as the water comes down the pebbled wall to really reflect and resemble Issaquah Creek. Next slide. Shows a little bit more of the thought around this water feature, that it would be something that would be changing depending on flow, volume of the water, create some real flexibility. Would also create through sort of this cobble or gravel feeling of the texture, even when, say, we have the water off in the winter, it's still going to have a creek feel and a creek feature to it. So again, a lot of thought around this. Next slide shows some images of the material options that we want to proceed into design with. Again, a variety of textures, feel, very much emblematic of Issaquah and our natural surroundings. Next slide. These next couple of slides show how this design isn't just for pedestrian plaza, but how we take some of these exact same features and pull them in on the other side of the park at the Senior Center and the Senior Center Plaza. Again, thank you to our legislators. Thank you to Shelley's update tonight. The additional $700,000 will certainly help further this investment and be a really exciting public space. So again, just taking some of the same landscaping, we're looking at a picnic shelter. Next slide shows, thank you, Tisha. One back, sorry. Some of the preferred activities as we activate this space, and we talked with the seniors, space for bocce. Bocce is also long and linear. That could be a similar space for cornhole, but other recreational activities that are great for seniors, but also other generations. We want to create a space that doesn't feel like it's seniors only, that's very multi-generational, game tables, benches, seating, probably some raised garden beds around the senior center as well. So finally really giving that side of the senior center a stronger relationship to the park. Also included, next slide, is, next slide, thank you, a shelter that again helps to unify that plaza space in front of the senior center, creating a really nice covered gathering space for, again, whether it's senior programs or other community groups, but another place to gather, another place to overlook the play area and some of the other activities in the park. Next slide. The idea of sustainability is something that we've thought through all the way through, and will continue as we take this into actual design, looking at practices like biofiltration, soil cells for the trees, keeping in mind habitat as we think of plants and landscape and flowers, not only pollinator habitat, but other habitat. Looking at salmon-safe practices is certainly a standard for us in any design that we carry forward as a city, but then also looking where we can utilize reclaimed, recycled materials in this design. So next slide. With that, it's a really exciting project and one that we look forward to sharing this concept further with the community and all those community partners. Our goal is this spring and summer to be heading into actual, as I was saying earlier, design, the permitting process, ultimately coming back to you as City Council with a bid award and construction. The goal remains 2024 with this ARPA funding. I'll know a lot more at the end of summer as we go through the permitting process, and I think I'll mention this at the Eck House as well, but would look forward to providing you an update towards the end of summer as to where we're at with this. So I'm going to stop there, see if there's any thoughts or feedback on this project before heading into Eck House.
Sounds good. Thoughts or feedback? Let's see, we can do Deputy Council President Hall and Councilmember DiMichele.
I just had a quick question that came to mind. If we've thought through whether or not because the fit and fun equipment is still flanking the senior center, right? Will that be moved at all, or have we thought through what's going to happen to that?
It will remain as part of the park. It might need to get moved a little bit, but we hope not.
Good question. Councilmember DiMichele?
No question, just I'm yclept. It's just so beautiful. It's just, I just looked at it and I thought this is just amazing, and the way that it's opening up and letting the sunshine into that pedestrian park, and the water feature I absolutely love. I think it's going to be so popular, and just the thoughtfulness that has gone into all the different elements of the design. So yeah, I just love it. So I'm just looking forward to the day that we can say, go do good work there. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments before Director Watling proceeds? Not seeing any. Director Watling.
All right. Pardon the beep. I lost my driver. Next slide. Great. All right. to Confluence Park and the Eck House. Again, happy to give a report here. You notice all these visuals, they have various dates on them. Again, just pulling together a lot of the work that we've been doing. This is a visual that we did in January. Was part of a pretty elaborate scoping and phasing conversation we had, but love certainly the image of the Eck House. Next slide. So as and you've heard this from some of those that provided public comment, as we did that scoping work, we really identified pretty early on two key goals that we wanted to accomplish. In fact, these are goals that were consistent as we talked about this last fall with you, is how do we look at restoring the Eck House, activating the Eck House, and better connecting it to Confluence Park as a real public amenity within the park. And in doing so, in doing that, how do we also find ways to recognize and celebrate the history that Eck House represents, and consider potential landmarking. I want to note within these goals, too, that the Eck House is on the city's historic resource inventory. As a house, as a property on that historic resource inventory, that means we have to do some due diligence and look at considerations for what we want to do with that house and that property. So a lot of this work, a lot of this conversation tonight, a lot of the conversations that we've had about really creative ways to consider activating this house and doing it in a very historically respectful and ideally landmarking way really speaks to the due diligence we want to do as that house is on our historic resource inventory. Next slide. So this slide represents some of that work and some of that conversation we had in January, not only with our design team, but also King County Historic Preservation staff, and other key community members. And it was really, as we considered the house and considered what paths we want to take and what are some of the trade-offs, what are the pros and cons of these various paths. You noticed up above, and again, given that this house is on the HRI, as we consider at least demonstrating our consideration for what landmarking would look like, that is where we're sort of landing, and where you'll see this presentation is what would it look like to consider sort of that second pathway down, preserving the house as a public amenity. So both doing improvements, but doing it in a way that it's not just a landmark space that you can look at, but it's actually a living, breathing public amenity that is serving a purpose and meeting a community need. And as we pursue that, I'll note this, as we pursue that path and pursue that with this design process coming up, it doesn't preclude, if we were to conclude that considering options of not landmarking it are still something that is a consideration. So determining that single pathway now doesn't mean that's the only pathway that we need to proceed with moving forward. Next slide. So as we started looking at the Eck House and started looking at these potential pathways, we really, it became pretty clear, and if any of you have spent time around that house, whatever approach, whatever pathway we wanted to take, there were some significant issues that need to be addressed with that house and need to be mitigated. So this really led to the need to do a structural assessment. It was one of the first things we did this first quarter. Looking at these visuals of interesting note, in the upper left is a image of the foundation. There's not a foundation to this house, but it's a very interesting history. Those are original cedar stumps that this house was built on. So those are turn of the century cedar stumps that should we, whatever we choose to do with this house, we're going to need to give it a foundation. We talked about reuse. Those stumps have a very interesting story and would be really cool to consider what some type of reuse would look like for those. Next slide. So the structural assessment itself, a couple of notes just to make. Obviously, any type of public use, any change of use from residential to any type of public assembly is going to be needed as we consider public use. This is per our city code, per occupancy and use. As I said earlier, a foundation would be needed, and the structure would need to be stabilized. That includes seismic upgrades per our code. As we looked at the space itself, all the interior walls are flexible enough and not load-bearing that it's possible to open up the interior space to create one sort of large single-use or single-room pavilion that really maximizes public flexibility. You'll see a couple of examples why we think that's most advantageous for really utilizing this space as a, and I think you've heard it said through the fall, I know the public has certainly heard it said, whether this is defined as a shelter or a pavilion or indoor-outdoor, creating that one big sort of covered flexible space really remains the goal as we do these considerations. Great opportunities also to retain the historic value as we consider that. And that goes right to this next slide as we have had a number of conversations with our colleagues at King County Historic Preservation. Some of their initial feedback really speaks to that. The exterior of this house holds the highest historic value and the significance and would be a real priority, again, as this is on our historic resource inventory, would be a priority for them for us to consider preserving. The interior structure does not have that same value. It's been updated, changed so many ways. It gives us flexibility to do something in the way we're proposing on the inside. The porches, the front entry, the windows all have significance. Also of interest of note, and I think opportunity as we think of this as a park amenity, the back of the house probably has the least historic priority as opposed to the front and the sides. So really creates that opportunity for opening up whatever use of this house that might be to give it such a really strong relationship to the park.
Oh, sorry, Councilmember DiMichele.
That's okay. So it's interesting to hear about the back of the house is not a historic priority, but it's attached to the house. Is there some percentage of change that you make that finally removes the historic value of the house altogether? And it seems like if we're proposing quite a bit of renovation, then we're going to have to be really careful to preserve a certain amount of the history. Are there any guidelines, or is that really a case-by-case kind of situation where the historic preservation group would be able to help us?
That's where the design team at Methuen that's done historic reservation or restoration, the work with the King County folks is really going to help us in that. Are really going to help us in that. Obviously, the exterior being the priority, the porches on the side have those features that have the highest historic value is what's most important. So I don't know to the degree that there's a specific percentage. So we'll learn as we go.
It's a work in process sort of as you go through the process of figuring out what we want to do with it and all of that. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep. All right, so continuing on. Boy, sorry, lost my thought. As we look at sort of what we were just talking about, forgive me, the design process itself, there's a lot of openness to working with not only the Historic Museum and their feedback, but also historic preservation teams. Given the I think the uncertainty as we go into the design process, given I don't think we're at a key decision point for whether to landmark it or not. The pathway we've certainly talked with the design team and talked with historic preservation folks is do the design work first, understand what it is we want to do with the house before applying for landmarking. So that is certainly the process that we've talked with the administration about and are certainly considering as this is presented to you right now, as opposed to not trying to landmark it right now, but do the design work first. Next slide. So with that, the approach that sort of as we've talked with the park board and sort of are considering and would love your feedback on tonight is this idea of realizing, in fact, if you want to go to the next slide, there's I think a good visual that shows this connection. You'll see in this visual.
Director Watling, we have a question from Councilmember Martz.
Sorry, I had it up while you were still talking about the Eck House. It just wasn't very visible.
Do you want them to go back a slide or two? Or?
Yeah, could you just go back a couple slides? So maybe back to the landmarking path slide. There we go. The one that had the little paths. There we go.
There we go.
Thank you. I don't think I understand from the presentation the advantages and disadvantages of landmarking and what it would mean to the options that are in front of the city. But it seems like, I really liked that when you came back on the park that we just talked about a second ago, right off of the front, that you came back with some options and got a sense from the body. I feel like we need that sort of a conversation here, and to get an idea of what the appetite is from the council. Order of magnitude, right? What's $500,000 get us? What's $1 million get us? What's a couple $1 million get us? What would it mean to Confluence, right? And then, we have that conversation and how the Eck House, what it can mean to Confluence, what it could mean to a further build out of Confluence, right? We have been talking to Mr. Christensen's point. This conversation's been going on for 15 years, right? Before most everybody who's on council was involved in the city. And there's been a lot said, and there's been a lot that park is capable of. And I really want to understand what the Eck House could mean in a historical context, with keeping the historical nature of the structure, what it could mean to us as having a public function, for instance, versus not having a public function. But it all comes down to really what's the appetite in the city to invest in this. I was looking at where I lived before this in Minnesota. There's a Smith Douglas Morehouse in Eden Prairie that they just did a beautiful job with, and it's a classic 1870s little house on the prairie kind of house. But it meant a lot to the city of Eden Prairie, and they haven't built a whole park around it, but it means a lot to the city that it's there, and Eck House could be that for us. So anyhow, I just believe that really need some information and need to have a conversation as to how much appetite there is for how big of an investment to put into the house. Again, in the context of an ongoing, $15, $20, $30 million that we're going to eventually, when all is said and done, put into Confluence, right? What do we want the Eck House to be as part of that? But as our one really rich historical element of Confluence, I want to make sure that we have a good conversation as a city. And this question around landmarking, like I said, I don't really understand what it would mean to the conversation or not, but I sure hope we have that conversation soon. Thank you.
And Director Watling, just a question. So, the informational update is on the ARPA funding. The council had asked for ideas for 2 different parks in town. The scope of what would be required to landmark and renovate is a great question. I'm just not sure it's part of this project. Can you touch into that a little bit? Can the council proceed with investments in Confluence Park and then budget to do the work that would be required? Because they do need to understand feasibility and costs and all the rest of it. How interconnected are these in going forward with the ARPA project?
Yeah. Thank you. Both of those are really good questions. I think the rest of the presentation will start to touch into both of those a little bit. Yeah, with the ARPA funding and like why that visual shows our suggestion of saying those are really important questions about the Eck House, and there is value to landmarking. There's access to grant funds when you do that. The ARPA funds, though, have a shot clock. The ARPA funds and sort of the federal requirements that go around those funds might not be the best funds to use in doing a historic house renovation. And so what is being sort of thought about the scope of this project is knowing the importance of that story of the house, the Eck House, and how we might want to consider whether we landmark it or not, how we might want to consider accessing a lot of grant opportunities that are out there to do the work, doing at least some initial design to begin to see, and right now we're looking at the neighborhood of perhaps upwards of $1 million to do that work at the Eck House. But let that work continue while we, since these are ARPA projects, as the mayor said, invest the ARPA funds on that connection between the house. And again, as we think of the back of the house opening and having a relationship to the park, let's make the ARPA investments and make sure this decision, whatever it is we do with the Eck House, has a relationship to Confluence Park and strengthens that relationship, make that ARPA investment, and also take the time to make some of these final decisions about the Eck House and what we want to do with it. So.
Yeah, I thank you, Director. I just wanted to make sure that the council doesn't feel like we're asking you to make a decision on the Eck House. We're not. You have not had enough information on the pros and cons, the potential costs. We don't have a work plan item on this. However, it is integrated with an investment in Confluence. So I want to make sure we focus on the ARPA portion of it. And please, if there's additional information you want to suggest going forward that you might need to have that conversation on landmarking, put it in the comments tonight after we do this presentation. That would be great. Councilmember Mertz.
Yeah, just to put a bow around that conversation, you know, when we did ribbon cutting on Confluence, Corey was there, I think we would respectfully have said, if 13 years ago, if we said, we still don't have a master plan for Confluence 13 years later, I think we would be disappointed. So I understand there's a shot clock on these particular dollars and we need to do what we need to do here, but let's get that plan in place. Confluence is such a jewel. It's hard to envision the entire green necklace without understanding what Confluence is. So I'm excited. I sure hope I don't have to be on council for 13 more years to have that conversation. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you. Oh, continue on, Director Watling.
Thank you so much for that, and totally agree. So if we go back to the visual of the concept, and please squint as you look at it. This is not a design. This is really just a concept trying to show this relationship, as I was saying earlier, between what we think the important role the Eck House plays in Confluence Park, and what that public use of the Eck House might be, but then also the back of it and how it can have a relationship to not only the play area, but the rest of the park. And what we're suggesting or thinking of as we move this forward is use those ARPA investments on that, what we're calling phase one in this visual, and then continue with the momentum. We think there's some tremendous momentum, Councilmember Martz and others, around these conversations we've been having these last couple of months about the Eck House, to really finally create a vision for that. Let's let that work continue in earnest. Next slide. And speaking of the Eck House, we've done some initial work in talking with the architect and what could public use of this Eck House be. I'm not going to sort of read this overview, but this was a sort of helping set the table for some of these concepts you're going to see. What's really, really important is these are really meant to demonstrate if we create this big single room, vaulted ceiling interior for that house, what are some of the flexible public uses that could take place in this, what I'm calling a pavilion, a park pavilion in many ways. Next slide. So, this could range from everything, as we've talked with the Art Commission, how do we host, one night or, weekend art exhibits and places to certainly display community art. Next slide. Again, not a design, but just a way of showing this large single room picture, I suppose, to the left side of this back of the house. Think of that as these rolling doors, or some way of being able to open up in the summertime or be closed in the wintertime. But just some ideas of how the space could be arranged. Next slide. You know, if there was a desire for reception or, you know, rentals, capacity for this would be anywhere from 40 to 50 people. So again, a size that certainly the community has said that they're sometimes in need of space for. Next slide shows what a floor plan would look like in that type of an arrangement. Next slide. We're not planning on this being a concert hall per se, but if there was a speaker series or you know, a music event that someone was wanting rental space for, how this space could be utilized for that, you'll see in the next slide. And again, these visuals were really meant to just show, should we consider this being sort of this large vaulted ceiling space, ample flexibility, and ample opportunity for the public to use this house, this historic house, in a very active living way. We think that is such a great add to the vision and really what was the original master plan of Confluence Park, and having this house be part of the park, but again, doing it in a way that celebrates the history of the house, that tells the story of the history of the house, but really becomes a usable, functional amenity within Confluence Park. Next slide. Talks a little bit about next steps and what we talked a little earlier. How do we proceed? Again, given the ARPA funding, we would suggest we proceed with design of the plaza and that outdoor space in earnest. We also continue to work with our partners and look at some of this initial design work for the Eck House itself, come back, continue this conversation about should we landmark or not landmark, what are some grant strategies that we want to begin to pursue, begin to outline those, how can we find and leverage that insurance money, that $200,000 that we have that we didn't want to invest until we had a vision for the Eck House, but let's get that vision for the Eck House. Let's leverage that $200,000 with some other grant funds and make this happen. The goal would be, again, coming back to you ultimately for bid award and construction of that ARPA-funded space, and again, hopefully keeping this momentum and ultimately having a vision and a game plan for how we want to and what we want to do with the Eck House. Again, end of summer might be great timing, not only for pedestrian park and the Senior Center Plaza, but continuing this conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Watling. And thank you for doing the outreach and being able to bring in all those voices. Obviously, we are hearing from the community that the Eck House is got a very special place in people's hearts. We just don't have all the information that you needed on the Eck House. So time now for questions. There is no action this evening. This is just informational. Councilmember Hunt.
On the slide that had the map, Director Watling, it looked like on that map, the phase 1 included part of the Eck House and the wash house on the side. Am I right, though, that all of the Eck House considerations and options, that would be part of that would be part of phase 2?
Correct. That would be part of phase 2. Yep.
Okay. And then also, I had emailed a number of questions, but I think one that I wanted to ask here is the options that were presented. We ultimately that they aren't mutually exclusive. They would be all options if we went with the flexible use space. And so I just wanted to clarify that because it looked like there were individual options, but it sounds like that's not the case. It would be flexible, and it could be for any of those art gallery, et cetera, or other uses that people would need a rental space for.
Very well said. Yes. And probably other considerations as well would be the goal.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to make pretty much the same statement. I just wanted to, I believe that Confluence Park is also part of the Creative Arts District, if I'm thinking of the map correctly. So there, I would say that there'd be a whole lot of potential of connecting the Eck House to many, many art-related activities. So I really love that picture of it as an art gallery, although art gallery could be many, many different things. That picture's a little bit sterile. It could be much more a livelier place. So I think if I can articulate a little bit better than I did the last time, what I was trying to get at is, you know, the building is old. It's sitting on tree stumps. And so I guess what I was really more trying to get to is there an urgency here to make sure that we do something about this house before it deteriorates beyond repair, before it's, you know, and before we, too much of the historic value has been lost. And so I know we're saying that we need to make the ARPA decision like right away, which I absolutely agree with. But also I feel like there is an urgency to make sure that this building doesn't deteriorate anymore and that we really make some decisions about it and get moving forward on whatever we're going to do there. So I don't know if that's a question or a
No, that's a
comment.
good question. And Jeff, you may want to share some information after the fire. There were a couple of investments made in the building to delay, prevent, and additional damage to the building.
Yeah, great question, comments. We would agree. This feels like a strategic moment. There feels like there's some momentum around. Let's really establish a vision for this house and how we move forward. As the mayor said, we've as best we can secured the inside of the house. It's not exposed to direct weather events, but yeah, it's been in decay. It'd be great to continue to carry these conversations forward and see if we can come up with a collective vision, a strategy for going out and getting some grant funding and seeing if we can make this happen. So we really look forward to those further conversations.
Thanks. Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. Director Wadling, thank you for putting this together. It gives us a great deal to think about and options going forward. I had some questions whether or not there was going to be either a kitchen or any type of food prep areas in there. I know we're in the basic design, but as I look at it, none of the designs have it in there. And if we're going to do a dining or reception facility, I'm just wondering what kind of kitchen might have been considered. Are we going industrial? Are we keeping it small and basic, more like Gibson Hall? Just some thoughts to think about. I know you probably don't have an answer tonight, but as we're going forward, it just seems that it's one of the things we'd want to consider in the final design.
We will capture that comment coming back. Yep. And is there any other thing that individual council members would like to add back if there is a phase 2 conversation on scoping? And let's go to Council President and then Councilmember Hunt.
I think one of the things that I'm thinking of, and I think Corey brought it up quite nicely, is there's connectivity at the base here. And so how do we determine what the height of kind of that shelter area should be as it relates to the Eck House? If one part is going to be through an ARPA investment, another part, you know, depends on the landmarking decisions and the decisions on the Eck House. So I think I would be really interested to understand how you're approaching that, and particularly as it relates to, you know, how much of the design do you need to do on the Eck House in order to be able to move forward with the other portion of the park?
That's a great comment as well. We'll capture that one. And who's next? Councilmember Hunt?
Yes, thank you. One piece of information that would be helpful for the subsequent conversation is there will be costs associated with the renovation, but there will also be costs associated with the maintenance and the ongoing staffing that would be needed. And I think it's always best practice to consider those ongoing costs when we have a decision to make, because this building currently has no public use. And so there is not that staffing that would be necessary if it became a art gallery on some occasions, et cetera.
Thank you. Very true. I'm going to go to Councilmember Martz, and Council President, are you following up?
Had a second follow-up.
Okay, Councilmember Martz, and then Council President.
One thing I think we need to think about is that's occurred in the 13 years that working on this park is a sense that 100-year floodplain line might not be sufficient given severity of storms, you know, early melts of snowpack on Tiger and Squawk and all that kind of stuff. So you know, as we talk about the park, understanding if the 100-year floodplain, if we consider that sufficient, you'd hate to see a house that survived, you know, 100 years get wiped out by a new icky kind of flood. Thanks.
Great comment. Council President?
Yeah, I was going on the same idea. I know we had passed the
500-year storm.
Yeah, the 500-year storm requirement, and so dwelling residences had to be raised to a certain height. I'm not sure if that would apply in this case, but it likely is a good preservation idea. And so again, relating that to the shelter area and that base. Yeah.
Good
Great
connections.
points.
Thanks. Any other comments? I'm looking around. Councilmember Joe?
Just one final comment on my side. As I look at the reception and the design for the speaker music ceremony, option 3, I wonder if we could look at the orientation going the other direction, in the sense that the front door is right behind the speaker or right behind the performer. And it's, if I'm doing an event, I wouldn't necessarily want to have people coming in right behind me as I'm doing the speaking or as I'm doing the performing. I'm wondering if there'd been any thought to changing the orientation and what that would look like for the other pieces, whether it's the bar or the reception table or what have you. Just a thought in terms of kind of how we look at this space and whether or not it would be really usable, or you know, something that would be really an idea that people would want to rent along the way. So just a thought along the way.
Yeah, we'll capture that one as well. Thank you, Councilmember Joe. Councilmember Hunt?
Thank you. I have one question on the ARPA part of this. When this last came to council, there was consideration of the Eck House being part of this ARPA-funded portion of the project. And I'm wondering if there are going to be, or if there have been, design considerations of how that funding would be used for the part of the project that is now phase 1, if there's any additional work that can be done or additional structures that can be done, since originally the scope was including the Eck House, and now it's the part of the park next to the Eck House, but not the Eck House itself.
And I think we'll capture that as well, and we'll have to come back and provide that information in a follow-up. Because I'm not sure you have the separation of details tonight for costing.
No, all great questions, thank you. I guess I would just add why we think as we move forward, doing some degree of design of both of these spaces is so important because of relationship, because of, you know, relationship and opportunity. Where do we best invest that ARPA money now? Where can we best invest that? So we'll certainly come back again. I think this great info, design on both of them is really going to help inform us.
So I'm just going to check something with council. I think in the next steps, the council would like to understand if any of the ARPA funds are used for scoping or improvements to the Eck House in order to accommodate the Confluence Park portion of it, and how these two projects tie together. And that I get the sense that the council is supportive of spending some of the ARPA money on these preliminary items that could lead to a future repurpose, reuse of Eckhouse, if it helps with the transition to make sure that these two components connect, that you're okay with using ARPA dollars, some of the ARPA dollars to do that. Is that general sense of the group? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
it.
the presentation and all the work and all the community work and all the excited community members that are hearing about the project. This is great. The next item of business this evening is good of the order. And there are a couple of upcoming meetings that I can go through, but does anybody have any items for good of the order before I go to that? Okay, I think he beat you. Councilmember Joe, Deputy Council President Hall.
Just something really quick that I didn't want to include with the Cascade Water Alliance main report, but Ray Hoffman has had a health setback, and he is decided to step down temporarily for 90 days, and the board has adopted a resolution to have Chuck Clark, former executive officer, come in on that temporary basis as a part-time employee to handle that. So if you do know Ray, drop him a note, let him know that he's in your thoughts along the way. But we do expect him back, but it certainly was a temporary measure that the board took that I thought I'd let you know about.
Super sad. Thank you very much. Deputy Council President Hall.
Just very briefly, I wanted to say the farmers market is better than ever. Honestly, like the last 2 weekends, or actually we didn't get to go to the first weekend because we had a council retreat, which was disappointing. But last weekend, even in the blaring heat, was amazing. So I just wanted to kudos to everyone who's involved in that work. It is another level this year, and I just love to see it. So well done.
That is great. Thank you. Any other good of the order? Okay. The upcoming meetings are Monday, May 22nd, Committee of the Whole. The anticipated agenda items include the 2024-2029 Capital Improvement Plan, facilities funding and new funding sources for capital projects, and affordable housing goals for future capital investment. On Monday, June 5th, the City Council meeting is happening with anticipated agenda items including the 2021 Building and Fire Code adoption, the lease agreement with Motel 6, the emergency housing program, and the behavioral health coordinator positions. We did have an item on there for council to consider amending the Issaquah Municipal Code to prohibit drug possession and use. However, we will wait to see how the vote turns out tomorrow and whether or not all of the elements that the council would expect to be in the state level legislation are there. And so that may not actually be an item on your agenda or for that meeting. So the last item we have this evening is an executive session, and this item of business, the City Council will now recess into executive session to discuss pending potential litigation. Per RCW 42.30.110(1)(I), the item is expected to take 30 minutes with no action anticipated in open session. Executive sessions are closed to the public, and we will recess into executive session at 9:07 p.m. I'm assuming to start with a little 5-minute break to give everybody a little time. And I'm asking the city clerk to move the city council and any relevant staff into a separate session within this meeting. Anyone who's not a part of the closed session can remain in the meeting virtually. You are welcome to stay until the meeting is reconvened. Those in attendance are not able to stay with us at this time. So city clerk, can you let us know when you've moved us over? Yes. 5-minute break sounds like that's on everybody's radar. Thank you.